Hey everyone, Scott Cunningham, aka Scottsy Business. Today I'm going to be talking about the bill affecting the Communications Decency Act, Section 230, and how it could change everything. So I just recorded this video. It was like 40 minutes long, and I realized that this camera was not recording properly, just the other camera was, which is devastating because it's 11 p.m. and I'm super tired. I just did an interview before this, and that was like an hour and a half. But this is important. This is one of the biggest changes to the political, the social, like so many different venues of our digital lives. It's really going to free us from all the craziness that has been happening in the past 5 to 7 years, maybe, or so. And well, really in the past it's been really ramping up censorship, the authoritative left taking control of communications online, these massive tech giants having basically a monopoly on the internet. And if you don't want to give them that much of a label, you can say they basically at least have a monopoly on social communication and advertising, which is more than enough to mass feed propaganda and election meddling and just tons of malicious things, which we've seen time and time again. So Josh Hawley, a Republican senator, came out to introduce a bill that would change Section 230 to fix a lot of these problems. So I wrote a full article, which I will link, and you can go and just read this if that's what you prefer. But I'm going to be going through this on video with you guys today. So he stepped up to introduce this bill that basically tries to minimize the massive overreaching power that they've obtained in the past several years. And really what it does is it's to remove the legal liability protections that they get under Section 230 if they're acting as a publisher and not a platform. So the whole point is that all of these platforms have been acting more like publishers, more and more so in the past several years as they've had more censorship and more deplatforming and doing all of this arbitrarily, applying their policies and guidelines, sometimes not even using them at all. That tends to lean anywhere but the left. It's like a couple people on the left and then anyone to the right of the progressive and far left. So classic liberals, libertarians, centrists, anyone on the right, they all are getting the boot. They're getting censored. Their opinions are being deleted. They're being banned. They're getting all the terrible things. And people say, well, there's so many worse things in the world happening. Why worry about this? Well, if you don't have real free speech, then how can we combat how can we really deal with any of the other issues in the world if we can't freely discuss them? Gotta protect free speech before you protect anything else. Well, maybe not anything else, but generally, so that you can protect everything else. So yeah, what this pretty much aims to do is it'll protect, well, I guess here, let's preface this. What the current Communications Decency Act under Section 230 does is it allows them to not be liable for libel, defamation, anything illegal that other people have posted on their platform, because they're a platform. Like a cell phone provider, if someone talks to someone on Bell or Rogers or T-Mobile or whatever, and they, talk about committing a crime or whatever, the company isn't listening to your conversations and then banning you from the platform because they're a provider of a platform, meaning they don't choose who speaks and who doesn't. And Facebook and all these massive companies have been deciding who gets to speak and who doesn't, meaning they've been benefiting from these liability protections as a platform when they're acting and, executing all of these moderation and algorithm decisions as a publisher. So all they actually have to do is prove to the government, if this change goes through, what they would have to do is they would have to prove to the Federal Trade Commission every 2 years they would need to get certified and then reapply every 2 years. And what it would do is it would allow them to operate as a platform. But to prove and get that certification, they have to show that their moderation, their algorithms, everything that they're doing behind the scenes is politically neutral. Now, a lot of people say, okay, but what is politically neutral? And they're concerned that if we leave it up to the government, it'll just be worse than what we have now. Realistically, what we have now is a disaster, and I think them improperly defining what politically neutral is a much smaller problem than the problem that we already have. And the potentiality to fix this with this change is insurmountable. It could radically fix the problem and allow people to speak freely again. Too many people I know just don't post on Facebook because they're just afraid of being banned, and your family is connected there, so you want to be able to connect with them, but you can't really speak your mind because who knows if you'll get banned for it. We already know this. For example, I'm reading this on minds.com. If you try to share a minds.com link on Facebook, it'll make you answer a CAPTCHA and say it's unsecure. And if someone tries to share your link or whatever, they have to answer the CAPTCHA too. They're just making it as challenging as possible for platforms that do uphold free speech and aren't censoring people and doing all the crazy stuff that all these massive tech companies are doing. And it's a crazy world that we live in, because these companies, they don't even want to uphold free speech. They have come out and publicly said they do not agree with free speech. And they're okay with that. And as we saw with Project Veritas, they're definitely planning to meddle in the elections. They have before. They're really, really ramping up their malicious activity under the guise of moral virtue signaling. And it's a very, very dangerous game. And considering we know that is what they are doing and what they're going to continue doing, this is more needed than ever. And again, even if there is some issues with this, it couldn't be anywhere close to what we already have. And the funny thing is, anyone who goes to criticize this, they never present a better solution. They just say, yeah, but it could have, these problems. It's like, even if it did, those problems would be a tenth of the priority of how big of a problem that we already have now. People being censored, and even Elizabeth Warren, a massively prominent Democrat, tried to put up a Facebook ad about breaking up Facebook, and Facebook said, no, you can't go against us. And it's like, what, that wasn't against their policy or anything. It's just, they're just saying no. And while a lot of it is against the right, it's starting to happen to the left too. And maybe they're just trying to get ahead of this. Maybe they're just trying to ban and censor everyone and say, look, we're being fair. So that is one of the potential bad things that could happen. It could be that they just say, you know what? Yeah, we have been banning people on the right kind of unfairly because the left has a lot of the views that we hold, like the far left, like we want to be authoritative and force everyone to comply, and we want to add all these rules and policies and shadow policies that aren't actually listed against free speech. Free speech isn't good enough for them. They need way more than that. And it's a dangerous time for that to be normalized, and that's okay, and this is needed more than ever to combat that. So all they really have to do is just prove that they're being unbiased with their moderation and their algorithms. It's not that they actually have to do anything dramatically different, But again, the criticisms are that it could end up with more censorship, which would really just be more censorship on the left, which would just be equal across both. Which I'm sure, the right would be like, haha, see, this is what you get. But it would be bad because it would just be more censorship and there would just be more problems. But maybe then they would realize, okay, yeah, I guess this is bad because it's happening to us now. But people never realize, when you advocate for authoritarianism, it's going to eventually come back on you and it's going to affect you. You're not going to get away from it. You're not a special magical thing that gets outside of the exception. You think that while they're on your side because you're espousing their rhetoric. And then the second that they have everything they need, they don't need you anymore. And you were kind of being crazy too, but they just ignored that because you were helping them with your craziness. But now they're going to smack that down. And that's what we see that's just been history with socialism and communism and a lot of these terrible, authoritative, extremely far left doctrines. So look, if they did go the route of being a publisher, if they were like, you know what, we will be a publisher, there's three things, right? So we already covered the one. The one is they just be fair. They stop arbitrarily applying these policies. They just allow people to speak what they want to say, and they just uphold free speech. It's very simple. The law's there. They don't need to write anything new. It's already laid out. That would be the simplest solution, but it's not likely that they will actually go this way. Well, I mean, hopefully they will, but the second solution is they arbitrarily ban people on both sides. So now the left gets a taste of what everyone else has been getting. Again, Elizabeth Warren, her ad was blocked, so it's not like they don't get any, but it's very much not the left. So middle, slightly the classic liberal, so just a little left. It's really anyone right of the progressive and far left, as I said earlier. And the third example is where they say, you know what? We want to continue doing things exactly the way that we have been with no changes whatsoever. But, well, they would have to change something, and it would be this. If they decided to just say, you know what, we're going to keep banning the people that we have been, we're not going to be politically neutral, so we're going to be a publisher. And if they do that, they're going to probably have to pre-approve posts, no live streaming, really just nothing that could get them in trouble, because if they're a publisher, everything on the platform they can be held liable for, meaning that they have to really go out of their way to check everything. For all we know, they have to go through your private messages because Facebook already does that. The difference would be that they would have to approve it. I don't actually think that would happen, but the rest could be very, very possible. They'll ban live streaming. They'll have to approve all your posts because otherwise they could be held liable. And there might be a few people, like the best of the best, who won't be held liable. We're already seeing this where they're going to start labeling Trump's tweets so that you can I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was like they're going to quarantine his tweets so that you can see that there's it's bad or whatever. That's just like a taste of that. It's like they're basically trying to be a publisher without really going that route. And what they're also saying is, look, this guy breaks the rules, but because he's a famous politician, he gets to stay. So, but if other people do the same thing, they will be kicked off. So not only are they saying, look, we're basically a publisher, but we're also only supporting the elite, and the average person is just going to get the boot, which again is socialism if people aren't really catching on yet. So yeah, that would just end up in a lot more censorship. So two of the ways, more censorship. One somewhat, one really intensely. One slightly more fair across the board, one still continuing the way that they've been doing it. The best solution would just be to uphold free speech. Simple. Law's already written. So, bring this back up. So, given they do go forward, this is only going to affect companies that have more than 30 million active users in the US, more than 300 million users worldwide, and they're making more than $500 million in global annual revenue, which is basically just all the major legacy tech companies, you know, Facebook, Google, Instagram. Well, you know, that's a part of Facebook. All their companies underneath them as well, Reddit, Pinterest, you know, the works, Twitter, all the major ones that you know and use. And they pretty much all fit that bill. And it's good because they all need to be regulated. It's pretty bad. We saw Pinterest, like Tim Pool made a video about Pinterest and that got taken down for a privacy violation, even though he was commenting on public information just because they don't want people to know. Yeah, it's crazy. So the main aim of this bill is simply to ensure that platforms are politically neutral, as they should be, and to stop meddling in the elections and, you know, holding the monopoly that they have. But you know, they denied that they have any, you know, issues with meddling in the elections, but we recently saw Project Veritas kind of uncovering a lot of that, and that'll be a separate video because Veritas is gonna take equally as long to explain and go through. But this bill must go through, in my opinion. If it doesn't, it's just gonna get worse. And again, it's already really bad. This bill could not make it worse. And look, if it does, if a couple platforms decide to go the route of just being a publisher or just censoring way more, ideally the people will just leave and go to the other ones that actually uphold free speech and didn't double down, or go to the new platforms, mine, Steem, all these great platforms that have so many solutions to the issues that we have on legacy platforms. Even Nancy Pelosi came out and said, you know, like she had criticisms of Facebook and Senator Ted Cruz. Like, there's so many big politicians who are supporting this on both sides of the political spectrum. And Josh Hawley, the one who introduced the bill, there's a growing list of evidence that shows that big tech companies are making editorial decisions to censor viewpoints they disagree with. Even worse, the entire process is shrouded in secrecy because these companies refuse to make their protocols public. Yeah, yep. And this bill would have the Federal Trade Commission certifying these companies to prove that their moderation algorithms are neutral, and they would reapply every 2 years. Otherwise, they are a publisher. He said, this legislation simply states that if the giants want to keep their nice little government-granted immunity, he didn't say nice little, I just added that, they must bring transparency and accountability to their editorial processes and prove they don't discriminate. That's completely reasonable. If you got this magical grant of immunity from the government, you should at least be able to prove you're deserving of it. A lot of the articles that I read that were against this were actually, like, they didn't even link to the document or have any sources, which was really weird, but seems to be much more common nowadays. Like, half the articles that I see have no sources or anything. I think it's because they don't actually research it. They just they write it and they just put it out as soon as possible so that they're, like, you know, one of the first to get the views and make money, because that's basically all mainstream news outlets are trying to do these days, is just make money. And there's a huge hunger for truth. That's why Tim Pool is doing so well. That's why all these free thinkers, critical thinkers are really blowing up, because there's a hunger for unbiased news and just telling the truth and going off of the facts and what's really happening, not how you feel about it or the moral virtues and whatnot. So to quote from the actual document, a decision is biased if a provider makes a decision about moderating information provided by other information content providers that are motivated by an intent to negatively affect a political party, political candidate, or political viewpoint. So this isn't just about protecting politicians, it's about protecting you and your own personal views. I'm pretty sure that was obvious, but just to make sure that you are aware of that, it's actually in the wording of the document. It also says in there, like I didn't quote this, but it was just below that point in the document. It also states that if they were to blame an employee, like if they were to say, oh, the only reason that happened was because we had an employee who did that, they have to publicly share this and rectify it immediately upon learning about this. So they can't, come out like a few months later and say, well, I mean, to be fair, like when they get their audit or whatever, the Federal Trade Commission will come and do the certification after 2 years or for the first time. And they say, oh yeah, well, 2 months ago, this employee did this and we didn't agree with it because we're trying to change, but they did. And sorry. It's like, no, you had to come out and say, look, this employee did this, we're fixing it, and we're firing the person, or they're going to go into training, or whatever it might be. Otherwise, they risk being a publisher, and they shouldn't want that. Again, there's a chance that some of them might just actually opt into that, but generally, in terms of not wanting to ruin their platforms, they shouldn't want that. I already kind of covered this, but this was like one of the criticisms. For example, the Washington Examiner's Philip Klein said, if social media firms are worried about being liable for user-generated content, they're likely to be more aggressive in taking down any vaguely political content out of fear that it could put them in legal jeopardy. They aren't likely to respond by being more open to controversial views from all sides. And that's actually kind of interesting because, well, there's two things, right? They say this assuming that the platforms will fail or opt into being a publisher and then will have to figure it out and pick up the scraps and just try to survive with their craziness. And it's interesting that this person says that with that assumption, as if they know that they won't be able to pass the certification because of how bad it is. Or they completely misinterpreted the information because they say social media firms. I don't believe that the firms would then be liable or the individual pages would be liable for anything. I think it's just the platform that would be liable. Though they might say, okay, well, if you ever have anything that's bad, you're going to be banned for one mistake. Which again, them opting into publisher will not work out because people will just leave in droves and their platform will collapse. But again, we can solve this just by going for free speech and upholding free speech. That's all you need. The law is already written, people. I'll say it a million times. The law is already written. You don't need anything new. You've got the wording and everything is right there. You could copy and paste it. Like, geez. Or just say refer to the Constitution. And Google spoke out against this. They said, you know what, we're actually not for free speech. And of course, Vox, they were in kind of the cause of the Vox adpocalypse with Steve Crowder and Carlos Maza and just ruining countless channels on YouTube getting demonetized and just causing so much problems. Of course, they came out to speak out against the bill. Funnily enough, not unexpected that they would want more censorship. But yeah, they said, it'll likely just be more censorship for both the left and the right. It's like, I mean, to be fair, if the only change that we were able to get was that the left had to be censored as much as the right was, I would say, you know what? I mean, it's hard for me to take this position because I don't want any more censorship. But if them getting censored is what it takes for everyone to just like leave Facebook or actually go and put this through to make this really happen, because they realized the problem is a lot of the people who push for terrible, evil, authoritative policies, they end up getting affected by those policies too. They don't at the time that they're pushing for it, because of course they're going to champion their audience and the people who want what they want. But as soon as they've got it, they don't need you anymore, and they'll crush you down and put the boot to you, and they'll prop up the elites and put down the average person. And we know this is already happening on Twitter. Donald Trump, his tweets get quarantined, and it's like, yes, these violate our standards, but because he's famous and he's the president, it's fine. We're going to leave them up. So it's like, okay, so if you're famous enough, if you have a big enough user base, if you have power and influence, you get to break the rules and everyone else gets the boot. Socialism props up the elites and just makes everything terrible for everyone else. I don't know why people aren't seeing this. It seems so plainly obvious. Joshua Wright said this is basically a fairness doctrine for the internet. It's a bad idea. It'll inject a board of bureaucrats into millions of decisions about about internet content. This is central planning, full stop. Central planning. No. I get why there would be concerned with government, because they could be not the greatest, but again, honestly, anything right now is probably an improvement. But they're not going to make the decisions. They're not going to be there moderating with Facebook, sitting down with them saying, okay, this and then this one. No, they're not going to be in the decisions. They're going to make sure that you didn't make unfair decisions. It's very different. If they were going to get involved in the decision-making process, that would be insane. That would take forever. Like, you'd want to ban someone, and you'd enter like a 30-day process of getting banned, and you'd be appealing back and forth, and people would have lawyers for it. Would be crazy. But no, they just want to review the decisions and say, yeah, that looks right, or that looks unfair. Like, let's dive into this and see if it is unfair. But of course, all these mainstream leftist media, they want to go against this because they've been mostly getting the better end of the stick, because they are aligned a lot with these companies, because a lot of these companies are extremely left-leaning, but they're grossly authoritative. And I mean, I think it was only like 7 or 8% of the US identifies as wanting socialism. So it's a very, very small minority, and the rest of them are just too afraid to speak out because of the insane authoritative measures that they take. People are afraid. And yeah, the only real concern should be around whether or not it's politically, whether or not they're going to make it actually fairly politically neutral. And they're going to determine a fair, reasonable definition of what political neutrality would look like. And I understand that criticism. But again, I'll say it a million times, it's this needs to happen. We've been falling down this rabbit hole of just censorship and terrible socialism ideals, and it's not good. The government slightly getting involved in upholding free speech is the least of our problems. It's the least of your concern. Let me know what you guys think about this. Do you think this is a step forward or a step back for free speech? Do you think this is going to make these companies double down? Do you think some of them will? Do you think it'll be a collective decision? Let us know in the comments below. I'm sure everyone wants to get in on this. We're all waiting to hear from you. It's basically midnight now. I appreciate you guys for sticking around this long. I know this was a really long video. Usually when I go through an article, it takes way longer than it would even take you to read the article. But yeah, I appreciate you guys. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'm Scott Cunningham, aka Sconcy Business, signing off. Cheers.